Hi everyone, it's Urveez Kakalia from ImPerfect. I'm a counseling psychologist and the founder of ImPerfect. In today's video, we're going to talk about rational emotive behavior therapy or REBT, which is one of the therapies that I practice with my clients in my private practice. Now, REBT is an approach to therapy which has a philosophical underpinning, which means that once you understand REBT and the philosophy underlying it, you can apply it to a wide range of emotional, psychological, and behavioral distress. It falls under the CBT umbrella, so under the Cognitive Behavior Therapy school of thought. It's one of the specific therapies that falls under this umbrella. It was developed and originated by Dr. Albert Ellis, and there's a number of wonderful professionals still working in the field, very experienced professionals like Dr. Wendy Dryden, like Dr. Walter Matweychuk, which I'm greatly influenced by, and I try my best to attend most of their weekly webinars and Zoom sessions to stay updated. In today's video, I'm going to give you a brief of what REBT is. It's going to be a little longer than the other videos I've uploaded because it's good to get into the depths of it as far as possible to understand it well. Now, I'm going to explain REBT to you using a specific situation with a specific emotional distress. And I'm going to take it as my own example because that's just simpler to understand for the time being. Yeah, so I have a situation where I've planned a vacation and I've made bookings for hotels and flights for a trip that I'm going to take 3 months later, right? Now, I'm feeling really anxious and I find myself checking the rules and restrictions of the destination place daily, constantly worrying about if the trip will happen, if it'll materialize. I also have a tendency to want to cancel the trip altogether because it's really stressing me out. And I keep having thoughts and questioning whether it was the right thing to do to book a trip amidst a pandemic and so on. Right. Now, a very important question that REBT will ask in this situation is that what am I feeling most anxious about in this specific situation? Right? Is it the possibility of the trip being cancelled? Is it the possibility I'll lose my money? Is it the possibility of being infected during my travels and the possibility of being sent to institutional quarantine in an unknown place? Is it the possibility of getting stuck there due to a sudden lockdown being imposed? Or is it just the uncertainty of all of these factors and not having the certainty of what's the situation going to be like 3 months later at the time of my actual trip? Now, any of these factors could be what we call the critical adversity in REBT. It is a specific aspect of the situation, not the entire situation itself, that I'm having a distressing emotional response to. In this case, it's anxiety. In the therapy sessions, I will assist my clients to discover and zone in on that specific critical aspect of the situation, which is the critical adversity. And you'll recognize in a little while why it is so important to do this. Yeah. Now, this is the point at which REBT differs from some of the other cognitive behavioral therapy schools of thought, some of the other therapies that fall within the umbrella. This is the distinction that REBT pays close attention to, is the B, which stands for the basic attitude that we have about the adversity at hand. So if you think about A as the adversity, C as the consequence, which was the anxiety or the distressing thoughts I was having, the things I felt like doing when I was having them. That's the C, that's the consequence at C. The adversity was some of the things we talked about before, right? Now, REBT suggests that humans distress themselves at C by holding rigid and extreme attitudes at point B about the adversity at A, right? And REBT promotes what we call BC thinking rather than what most people will assume, which is AC thinking. Everyone will mostly assume that A leads to C. So because of the adversity being present, that is why I'm feeling anxious. Now, A does contribute to the consequence, but it does not cause the consequence. It is my attitude at B which causes my consequences at C. Let's apply this to the holiday example I was talking about before. So I'm distressing myself by holding a rigid and extreme attitude about my specific adversity. So out of the many critical adversities that I suggested in before, in this particular situation, let's say that I'm most distressed about the possibility of being placed in an institutional quarantine at this non-familiar destination. So, my rigid attitude may sound something like this, that I really hope that I don't get sent to institutional quarantine at my destination, and I absolutely need to know for certain that it must not happen. Now, not wanting it to happen is my preference, and that isn't really problematic until I added the latter part of the demand to it. That was that it absolutely must not happen, and I must know for certain that it must not happen. Right? This is the rigid demand that is actually contributing to my anxiety, that's actually causing my anxiety, partly because we already know that there's no way of knowing that for sure, especially 3 months in advance. So once we've discovered B causes C, what do I do now? How do I undisturb myself? So let's firstly ask, what would we like to feel instead of feeling anxious? Now, this is the point at which most of my clients and just people in general will say things like, I don't want to feel anxious, or that I want to feel calm and at peace. But unfortunately, those are not realistic possibilities, because when there's an adversity at hand, we're bound to feel negative emotions. The problem is that the anxiety that we're feeling is not just distressing, but it was leading to a lot of unhelpful, counterproductive behaviors and consequently to further distorted thoughts. Now, what we can realistically aim to feel is a healthier, helpful concern. Let's face it, this is a concerning situation on the whole, and one should ideally be concerned about these possibilities to begin with, because that is what is going to help us to plan ahead, take precautions, think rationally and realistically about these threats, and take the best course of action, and do what we realistically can do to influence our safety. This is why we want to be healthily concerned rather than carefree or calm or careless, right? Now, remember our BC thinking, where we said that my basic attitude is the one that's causing my consequences, not the adversity itself. So, if my B causes C, I need to work on my B to change my C's, the consequences, to more functional, helpful consequences. Now, REBT has a proposition for that, of course. It proposes that humans can undisturb ourselves by having flexible and non extreme attitudes about the adversities we face, rather than the rigid extreme attitudes we talked about before. In this case, I can work on adopting the flexible attitude that I really hope that I don't get put into institutional quarantine at my destination, but I do not absolutely have to know that for sure. It will surely be bad and difficult if it happens, but it certainly won't be awful and unbearable to experience that. This attitude is flexible because we're no more demanding that we absolutely must know. This has made room for the non extreme ideas that it wouldn't be awful and unbearable if it did happen to us. Now, what this helps is it helps me to gain those functional consequences we were hoping for. I'd I'd feel healthily concerned. I'd wear a double mask, a face shield if required. I'd sanitize my hands regularly. I won't unnecessarily go around touching things. I'll check with my airline and hotel about safety and sanitation procedures. And most of all, I won't make myself miserable for the next 3 months leading up to my holiday. And I'll be able to enjoy it while I'm there. Now, I can help to strengthen my belief in this new flexible attitude by asking myself if there's any evidence of my rigid attitude being realistic, logical, and helpful. So if I take my rigid attitude, the one that was not only wanting to know that I wouldn't be put into an institutional quarantine at my destination, but was also demanding that I have to know that for sure, is that realistic? Is it realistically possible to know for sure what is going to happen 3 months later? And this one's going a step beyond because it's demanding to have certainty that this is not going to happen. Right now, it is not a realistic ask because there's no way we can tell that, not now, not 3 months later, until it actually happens or doesn't happen. It's also not a logical demand that we're making, because if I ask myself why do I have to have the certainty, and why do I have to know that I will not be put into institutional quarantine, my answer is simply that because I wanted to know. Right? There's no other logic to this demand, and that's rather illogical because it's a circular argument. I want to know, therefore I have to know, and so on. So it's not a logical demand to begin with, right? And it's clearly not helping me. As we discussed the consequences that I was having, it was emotional distress, not very helpful behaviors, counterproductive behaviors, and my thoughts were getting more and more distorted as I was going on. On the other hand, if I ask myself the same three questions about the flexible non extreme attitude, whether the flexible attitude is realistic, logical, and helpful, my answers to that would be yes, yes, and yes, because it is extremely realistic for me to hope not to be put in institutional quarantine. And I'm acknowledging that I don't have to know that for sure. So that's a realistic ask. It's also logical because if I ask if I ask myself, why do I want to know? There's good reasons for that. And also, like we discussed, the consequences themselves would be more functional, and therefore, it's a more helpful attitude to hold. Now, working on this flexible non extreme attitude requires consistent reasoning and a lot of practice. If I do practice it consistently and in a committed way, I will help myself to strengthen my belief in this effective new attitude, and I'll get closer to my desired helpful functional consequences. To sum up, REBT proposes building flexible, non extreme attitudes towards the adversities that will often occur in our life. This is just one example that we've discussed about one distressing emotion. The more you familiarize yourself with rational emotive behavior therapy, which you can do either through books, reading books, looking at videos, listening to videos, attending webinars, or live demonstration sessions that a lot of REBT professionals in the field are holding. Whether you're studying it, whether you're going to a therapist who is assisting you with understanding it, you'll soon be able to apply it to various distressing emotions and adversities more and more independently. If you'd like me to send you a list of books or resources or suggest to you some of these live demonstration sessions that experienced therapists are holding, free of charge, very generously, please write to me at urveez@imperfect.co.in or use the contact us form on my website www.imperfect.co.in. You can find more information about rational emotive behavior therapy with me as a therapist on my website, which I'll link below in the description as well. If you found this video helpful, it's super encouraging to receive a like. Do share it with your friends to share the wisdom of REBT, and subscribe to keep updated on other videos I'll do to deepen our understanding of REBT and its philosophies. There's also a free downloadable worksheet available on my website for you to practice these ABCs. That's it for today. Take care, stay well.